Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to venture into the horrors of hotels. So have your keycard at the ready, and get comfortable to let the darkness take control. This happened about a month ago, when I was in Canada traveling. I am a 20-year-old American girl. We had just finished dinner, and the guys I was traveling with wanted to head off to the mall. But I was tired and just wanted to go back to my hotel room. They kept the car, and so I took the 20-minute walk back to the hotel on my own. By the time I made it back, the sun was starting to set. Our hotel happened to be right next to one of the Great Lakes, and the view was absolutely stunning. I stayed outside for a few minutes, just looking at the view. There was a nice boardwalk right along the lakes, and then went back in to drop off the leftovers and grab my camera for some photos. I came back outside the side door of the hotel, because it was closer to the boardwalk. Side doors emptied out into the parking lot of the hotel, and the boardwalk was right next to the parking lot, and took a few photos. It was pretty empty outside, since it was getting dark. Just a few people unloading their cars into the parking lot. But luckily, I caught a middle-aged couple, Bob and Linda, walking their dog, and asked them if they could take a few pictures of me. Now normally I hate taking photos, of myself anyway, and usually just take them of the scenery. But my mom had been bugging me to email her a few good ones of myself, because she missed me, and I figured now would be as good a time as ever. They were super nice, and took a few photos, and I chatted with them for a few minutes. But as I made to leave, Linda leaned over and said, "I just want you to be aware, but there's a man that has been trailing you down the boardwalk. We noticed earlier, and I didn't really like the way he's been looking at you." I immediately guessed who she was talking about. There was a guy who I had accidentally made eye contact with when I came out of the side door. He was leaning against the wall, right next to the door and smoking a cigarette. He was wearing baggy black pants, was covered in tattoos, and an accompanying black t-shirt. He looked a little out of place for where we were, an expensive part of the city. It was a really expensive hotel, and everyone there was basically nicely dressed, families and businessmen in suits. Something about him in that split second of eye contact had just felt off, but I dismissed it as me being paranoid for being alone in a foreign city. A few minutes after I had walked towards the boardwalk, I even glanced to see if he was still at the door, but I couldn't see him anymore. Evidently, I didn't look hard enough, and it really freaked me out that he had been following me, and I stupidly had not even picked up on it. Really thrown off, I told them I'd like to talk to them for a little while longer, just to make sure that he was gone. We didn't see him around anymore, and probably stayed there for another 20-30 minutes at least. They were really nice, as well as helpful about places to go in the city, since it was my first time there. But it was actually pretty dark, so I told them since the guy had gone, I would head back. They said they were heading off too, but turned out they were actually staying at my hotel, which we figured out when we were walking the same way. We laughed about it, and kept walking. We'd been right outside the parking lot for the entire time, so it was only a few steps to get back to the hotel slide door. You need to swipe a key to get into the side entrance, and as we were seconds away from the door, the man reappeared. Bob didn't notice, because he was already swiping the key, and I was directly behind Bob. But the creeper cut him right behind Bob. I'd been following Bob pretty closely, so there was barely enough room. Linda had only seen him from a distance before, and therefore did not know who he was. So I whispered to her that this was the guy, while he was 2 feet away, and internally panicked as we walked towards the elevators. Bob was still not clued in, and I didn't know how to tell him given that he was standing directly next to the creeper. I didn't know what to do, because I was staying on my own in my room, and it was on a different floor than all the other guys, who were not even back yet. So even that was irrelevant. I continued to try and figure out a plan, mentally running through what I could do. Police? Has the dude actually done anything yet? Probably not. So probably not a good idea. Also, my phone was on my bed in my room. I was walking forward on autopilot, eyes glued to the floor because I was afraid he would look back and make eye contact. The elevator came, and the 4 of us were standing there waiting for it, and we all shuffled in. Bob hit a floor button, and the creeper hit a floor button. I stared at my feet. On the last second, a dad and his 3 or 4-year-old slipped in too. So basically all of us were crammed in this elevator. The creeper, directly across from me in the uncomfortably small space. You know when you can just feel a person's eyes on you? I chanced to glance up, and he was staring, again. I thought about what a dumb way this would be to die. The dad and daughter got off. Linda whispered to just get off with them. Thank God, because I hadn't hit a floor of the elevator, not wanting to give mine away to him, but also not wanting to get off on a random one. We got to Linda's floor, and I stepped off with them. The creeper did not leave with us. Linda told me after that he had hit the button for the 11th floor, which was the top floor, probably in an attempt to see which floor I got off on. I chatted with him in the hallway for a bit, and then crossed my fingers that I would be fine going back to my room. I found a stairwell on the side of the floor, and imagined all the corners he could be hiding around as I sprinted down the deserted stairwell, back to my floor. Looking around both corners as I came down the stairwell, and jamming my key back into my room, were all too terrifying. Then I was locked and safe, and didn't come out of my room until we had to check out again the next morning. I didn't even want to think about what could have happened. Phoneless and alone. If I hadn't have stopped that couple, the earliest the guys would have noticed I was gone would have been next morning, because I told them I was crashing early, and they wouldn't think to check. I had worked at a hotel in a sketchy area. I would work the late afternoon/night shift. During the weekends, we would get people who would rent out a room, just for the sake of using our pool. The wintertime, we were more busy than usual, because if you live in Michigan, or in any Midwest state for that matter, you find out that winter can become very boring and depressing. I was working the front desk by myself, which is a huge no-no in the hotel industry, but the owners were cheap, and didn't feel like paying for two people to work the same shift. So at night, it would get weird. We would have a lot of men come in with hookers, and then families who would come to utilize our pool and hot tub. We had a rule that if you stayed in the room for over 2 hours, you'll be charged for that room and would not get a refund. Well, one night, I had a bunch of families come in to use the pool. I ended up having to close the pool area down early this night because a kid had thrown up in the pool, which meant it would take a whole 24 hours before we could get this all cleaned out and get it up and running again. I had a few families that were irritated by this, since this was their main reason to rent out a room. But when I explained what happened, they were cool with it and just stayed in their rooms. I, unfortunately though, had one lady who was not okay with this. She came downstairs to the front desk and began cussing me out. She was upset because I had closed down the pool area that was filled with vomit, and she wanted a refund for her room because she wanted to leave and go somewhere else. I explained to her, in a calm manner, that she was unable to get a refund for her room, considering it had been well over the 2-hour mark, which made her even more furious and get even louder still. I tried calling my manager, but he was too busy getting a lap dance at a strip club to seem to care, and I wish I were kidding about that. So I just kept talking to her in a calm and professional manner and explained to her that if she calls the hotel tomorrow and speaks to my manager, that maybe they could work something out. She wasn't having any of it. I think the fact that I kept repeating myself in a calm tone made her even more upset. Then she began telling me that she was going to leave with her kids and come back with her baby daddy, and they were going to kill my tiny white girl ass. At this point, I am now petrified, because she looks like a woman that kept her word. So I decided to call the cops. She took off before the cops showed up, and I thought that that was the end of her. Well, before the cops appeared, she called me and said, "I'm in the parking lot with my baby daddy, and we're waiting for your shift to end, because when it does, you're dead." Finally, the cops showed up and took a statement from me. They said there wasn't much they could do. They looked around the parking lot for the man that she said she was with, but they couldn't seem to find either of them. I ended up having to have one of the cops follow me to my car and then follow me home. And then I had to quit the very next day. At 15 years old, I travelled to Thailand on a family vacation with my mother and my sister. We stayed in a fancy hotel in the centre of Bangkok, which had a rooftop swimming pool. The hotel was deserted at the time, with the swimming pool completely empty. So I decided to swim alone, while my family stayed in the hotel room. I did about 10 laps of the pool before a suspicious-looking man appeared on the roof. He wore a thick garment and had a weathered face, partially hidden by a baseball cap. The man lingered for a while before he started asking me questions. The questions were innocent at first, like, "How are you enjoying Thailand? What's your favourite food?" etc. But soon, they became much more personal. "How many people are in your room? How many men? How much money did you bring?" Feeling uneasy, I jumped out of the pool, chucked a towel on and walked away. The man followed, but I managed to make it to an elevator just as the doors closed. Relieved I had escaped the situation, I travelled down 6 stories to our room's floor. When I got out of the elevator, the man was standing right outside my room. I started to panic, but I needed to return to my family. So I headed towards the door, and as I did, the man kept shouting, "How many men? How many men?" constantly repeating it, with an increasingly irate tone. I lied and said that there were lots of men, and that we were travelling in a large group, when in reality, it was just my mother, sister, and I. I quickly opened and slammed the door behind me. I locked the deadbolt and the 2 remaining door locks. I was glad to see my family as I entered. I told them of the events that had just transpired, and they laughed it off, completely indifferent to the matter. I was told by them that I was being paranoid, and he was likely just being friendly. "Yeah, Mum, asking all those questions is super friendly." I was distressed, and reiterated that we were in danger, but my warnings yielded little action. After 5 minutes had passed, my unease slowly subsided, and I got ready for the day ahead. As I did, I noticed a smell drift through the room, and a thick cloud of smoke soon appear above my head. The smoke originated from the air vents. Thoughts raced through my mind. Had the man started a fire? Did he want us to leave our room? Was it a trap? Was he waiting outside? I shouted to my family, and this time my warnings were taken seriously. We met at the door and raced outside, and the man was nowhere to be seen. Worried the man was expecting us at the elevator, my sister suggested that we take the fire escape, and we raced down 20 flights of stairs to the bottom. Along the way, there were no signs of the man. We entered the reception and described the situation of the smoke and the man. The receptionist, however, seemed indifferent to the matter and sent security to take a look. We waited in the lobby for a while, before we were told that the thermostat malfunctioned, and we were unable to stay in our room. We were offered another room. However, we decided not to stay and stayed elsewhere that evening. Fortunately for me, the man was never heard from again. I travelled to Liverpool a few years ago with an ex-girlfriend. We stayed in the Adelphi Hotel for 2 nights. I found it on a booking website for cheap, and I am a massive history geek, so I thought it would be perfect. For those unfamiliar with the building, it's been in continuous use from the 19th century. It has these really old-fashioned rooms with high ceilings and generally Victorian furnishings. I thought it was great if our room was a bit creepy, and there was a massive mirror right across from the bed. Even so, there was nothing out of the ordinary. So we went to explore the town. When we came back at night, we were too tired to even take a shower as we normally did. We fell right into bed. Something to be conscious of before I begin about the actual creepy part is that the room was an ensuite with a tiny foyer in between the bedroom and the bathroom, where the front door to our hotel room was also located, along with a storage closet. I always like to lock things before I go to sleep. It's kind of a habit of mine. So I locked both the front door as well as the chain lock on the door leading to the bedroom. So far, everything was normal, and we drifted off to sleep, or so I thought. Less than 15 minutes after I had closed my eyes, but not yet fallen asleep, I experienced the most intense terror of my life. I'm not talking normal terror. This was the most afraid I've ever been in my life. Like I was consciously aware that someone was watching me and didn't want me to know it. There was a feeling of dread in the air. like something wasn't right. I jumped out of bed and turned the light on. Nothing. But the door was wide open. I woke up my ex and asked her if she had gotten up to use the toilet since we had gone to bed. She said no, so I asked her again, with more intensity. She said no. She was certain that neither of us had gotten up in the 15 minutes since that she had turned off the light. I told her okay, and asked her if she felt weird at all. She said no, just very tired, and she wanted to sleep. However, I was too terrified to fall asleep, so I turned on all the lights in the room and locked the door again, trying everything to take my mind off what was seemingly just an empty room. Every now and then, glancing nervously up from my laptop to see if anything was still there. Hours later, I was too tired to stay up anymore, and I fell asleep without realizing. But when I woke up in the morning, the door was once again open, and once again my ex denied that either of us got up in the middle of the night to use the toilet. The same sequence of events was repeated the next night as well. After the first night, I began to suspect something was not normal. However, I refrained from Googling Adelphi Hotel and haunted until I was on the train out of the city. Apparently, the Adelphi is the most haunted hotel in Britain. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I was really frightened that night. I will never forget it. Even now, I'm sat at home in my well-lit flat in the middle of the day, and I'm getting scared just talking about this. When I wasn't living in New York City, I used to travel quite a bit by car, usually 80 to 90,000 miles a year. I found myself in this little town in Delaware called Milford. I had plans down there, not too far away in a place called Rehoboth Beach, which I think was about an hour away. Anyway, I was supposed to leave the day after I actually left, but to avoid getting up early in the morning and leaving, I ended up leaving after work at approximately 6 p.m. and taking the drive that night, which lasted about 5 hours and change. Since I was only staying here an extremely short amount of time, I got myself a shitty Airbnb, which I use all the time when I travel, so I'm pretty comfortable with it. I messaged the guy right before I left if I could rent his $50 little place that seemed pretty nice from the photos. The guy from the get-go was a little sketchy, and it took me some back and forth to get the place rented that night, after he informed me that his father would drop the keys off. He also informed me there would be quite a lot of tropical plants in the kitchen, and that he couldn't move them out on such short notice. Okay, whatever. I'm just looking for a few hours sleep then. Then I'll be out of there in the morning. So I arrive at about 11:15 p.m. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Milford, but it's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. This guy's place was in a tiny little gated, or fenced, community, which had a grand total of 15 to 20 houses. Pitch black. So I roll up to the place and grab my few items that I travel with, all in a duffel bag. I use the key code to unlock the lockbox and turn the key, which happens to be the loudest thing that's happening in the surrounding area at that moment. You know when you go to a place like that some shit is messed up, and you get that gut feeling that maybe you shouldn't be there. So I put my stuff down on the recliner in front of me, and lo and behold, a shit ton of tropical plants awaits me in the kitchen. I look around this place, which has a pretty decent sized living room. Bedroom number 1. There were dolls from the 50s everywhere. Twin-sized mattresses with no bed frame and no sheets, and laying in the middle of the floor. Okay, it's a no to that room. I then go to the following room. Nutcracker figures everywhere. One sheet on the bed, no pillow. Try to turn the light on with the only switch in the room. Oh wait, there's no light in that room at all. The switch goes to nothing. Alright, maybe I won't sleep in this room too. I'll just take the couch. At this point, I really felt pretty uncomfortable, but I knew it would only be for the night. Anyway, I was hungry, so I went to the only thing around that was open. A Food Lion that was closing in about 15 minutes. I grabbed some pizza bites and a peach Snapple and went back home. As a side note, I was so put off by this feeling that I set my GoPro I travel with up while I was gone, thinking I may catch something on camera. So I go back to the place, and the first thing I do is look around and make sure everything is still where I left it. It is. That's a good sign. I get my GoPro and take out the SD, and out pops the card, and I put it in my laptop. I still have the footage somewhere, and I wish you guys could have seen this place. It looked like where you would spend your last seconds. Lo and behold, nothing on the footage. At this time, it was well past midnight, and I had a full day of work and a good amount of driving, so I planned to sleep on the very small couch. The apartment had one small 19-inch TV, which didn't have a power cable, and the outlet by the couch was just far enough away where my phone wouldn't reach while charging, which wouldn't have mattered anyway, because I had Sprint at the time, and they have very shitty service to begin with. But where I was, the service was non-existent. I kept the light on, because even though I'm an adult, it gave me some sort of comfort knowing the light was on. Well, about an hour of laying there, and I couldn't get to sleep. So nature called, and I had to use the bathroom. So I got up and sat down in the yellow dimly lit bathroom, with the shower that had no curtain. Now let me preface all of this by saying the kitchen had hardwood floors, the type where if you slide a chair across, it makes that screeching noise that we're all familiar with. Remember that. This will play a role soon. But back to it. I'm in the bathroom doing my business, reading a bottle on the John because my phone is charging outside of the bathroom. Because how convenient. Which didn't matter anyway because, like I mentioned, I didn't have service. So I'm sitting there. I hear the chair on the faux hardwood floor screeching across the floor as it's gently being pulled. It takes about as long as it takes for someone to sit down, and I almost threw my heart up. This was a come to Jesus I screwed up moment. And then, just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, the sound of fingers rhythmically tapping on top of the wooden kitchen table, impatiently, getting faster. I was frozen and absolutely petrified. Good thing I was already on the toilet. I literally sat there and repeated myself 10 to 11 times. I'm screwed, I'm screwed, I'm screwed. So I sat there for 2 to 3 minutes and debated what to do. At this point, the tapping had stopped, but I figured that I couldn't stay there forever. I thought to myself, whoever is out there already knows I'm here. So I decided, shit, I'm gonna go out there and try and fight him off, grab the Bowie knife I carry in my backpack while I travel, and basically try and kill this person, because I assume they don't want to play checkers or talk about their day of killing with me. So I rushed out the door, and nothing. Nobody was there. No sign of anybody. The chairs hadn't even moved. Literally, I didn't even bother to check the rest of the place. I packed up my shit as if the place was burning down, got into my car, and drove to my Holiday Inn about an hour away at about 3 a.m. and told the guy at the desk what happened, and he let me check into a room until about 3 p.m. the next day. I even got bumped up to like a king-size bedroom because the room that was reserved for me wasn't even ready. Moral of the story is, don't travel to Delaware and be almost murdered by the local ghost murderer. I stayed in a hotel in Puerto Banús that wasn't really open. We booked and everything, but when we arrived, it was clear the hotel wasn't finished. We were taken to a room anyway, which had bare wiring and no water. A different room was found, and we were so tired. I just wanted to sleep. So I said it was fine, even though it was not decorated. Tools were left in a pile in the corner, and the plaster dust was still hanging in the air. I was awoken at midnight by someone trying to get into the room. I figured they would realize their error and leave it alone in a minute, but they didn't. I ended up getting out of the bed, ripping open the door and shouting, "What?" And I was faced with two people, clearly a pimp and his woman. They tell me that I'm not supposed to be there, and I asked them where I was supposed to be, and they said they didn't care, but just not there. I told them to fornicate off, closed the door and went back to sleep. About an hour later, someone is trying the door again, but this time, they're not just trying the handle. I happen to notice a hammer in the pile of tools, so I grab it, get close to the door, and shout through the door asking what they want. Their response was that they were here for the meeting. I shouted that there was no meeting, and was told that if I didn't let them in then the deal was off. It became suddenly clear that the room I was in had been earmarked for a drug deal, and my being moved into this room had ruined the whole thing. I opened the door after tucking the hammer into the rear waistband of my boxers, and I found 3 guys in the corridor, one clearly off his spuds on something, and the other 2 looked like bailiffs, with the big torsos and massive pecs. I explained I was moved here by the hotel, and that the previous attempts to enter the room had been a guy and a lady, who had been turned away as well. The 3 guys accepted this and left. I was awoken, no less than 6 more times that night, by people trying to get into the room. Each time I had to jam a hammer down my boxers, answer the door, and explain that no, this room wasn't available, and then try and sleep that little bit more. That room must have been used for all sorts, as I believe there were at least 3 drug deals and 2 prostitute liaisons arranged there. My wife and I were driving across country to a family vacation. It was getting late, and we were tired of driving and needed a place to stop. Most hotels were already full for the night, but we found a motel with vacancy and booked a room. It was your typical run-down motel right off the highway in Indiana. When we got to our floor, with only about half of the hallway lights working, we passed a room with red tape on the door. As a good husband, I could sense my wife's uneasiness, so to be as supportive as I could, I joked to her that I bet someone died in that room. She didn't appreciate the joke, but we were both tired and headed to our room about 3 doors down. When we got to our room, the wife went to use the bathroom, to find that someone had already taken a shit and just left it in the toilet. No paper, no flush. The entire room gave off a "you're gonna get disease or leave with bugs" kind of vibe. So we slept with our clothes and shoes on and made the best of it. The next morning during checkout, I made the same joke to the front desk clerk. "What happened to the room down the hall from us? Did someone die?" The clerk didn't hesitate to reply that, yes, someone had died. They fell asleep with a cigarette in bed and burnt to death in the room. My wife and I just said, "Oh," at the same time as we soaked in the poor taste of my joke as it became a reality, and turned around and left. I searched online to confirm the story, and sure enough it was true. This motel didn't have a fire alarm system that reported to the fire department, so when the room caught fire, the occupant died of smoke inhalation before someone was alerted to the fire. And I haven't stayed in an Indiana motel since. I travel a lot and have gone to plenty of third world countries, but my worst hotel story by far came in Sullivan County, New York, less than 2 months ago. We got hit by 2 storms that decimated the area and knocked out power for 10 days. I was there doing emergency work, and the entire area was a bit of a shit show. So they put me up in a hotel, and I'm like, sure, whatever. I didn't really check it out because our logistics person takes care of it, and I'm swamped doing 18-hour days. So I arrive at this hotel around 1 AM, exhausted. I show up, and it's locked. There's a handwritten note in crayon, I shit you not, in crayon, on the door, and it says, "Not here, call this number." I noticed at the time that this hotel is legitimately crawling with meth and crackheads. Not just weird people, but people screaming, running through the halls and slamming doors and crying. Finally, the guy comes and lets me in. The place smells like a sour mix of shit, death, and mothballs. I really didn't have a need for the finer things in life, but this was a little much. So I get to my room and have to walk through these dingy, filthy halls. It was a motel, so my room was exposed to the outside with a little walkway. I show up and immediately see a huge brownish stain on the floor that I can only guess was old blood. The lampshade was riddled with cigarette burns, and the room itself was filthy. Someone obliterated the bathroom in what I can only assume was a method out of Jackson Pollock's shit imitation. I was so tired and had to come at work in about 4 hours, so I just said screw it and passed out in my clothes with my boots still on. The door didn't close enough, so the wind was whipping on me through a large crack, and the heating didn't work. I wrapped myself around the duvet like a human taco, to no avail. About an hour in, people started scampering around outside, screaming and yelling. I got up and jammed a chair under the door handle, because of course the door lock didn't work. I seriously considered sleeping in my car, but it was cold, and I felt like I had a better chance of being murdered in a parking lot than a room. Some crackhead crashed into my little bay window thing shortly after, and I sat straight up, grabbed my Leatherman, and prepared myself to have to kill someone that night. When I got back to my station in the morning and told the guys where I stayed, they didn't even believe me. 2 of the cops there said they'd investigated homicides there. Not together, 2 different ones. The Red Cross rep said they used to send their homeless population there, but now they didn't because it was too dangerous. It's a big running joke now, but that at the time, it sucked so bad, and was the only time in my life I was genuinely worried about where I had to sleep. I was in Madagascar for a study abroad, and a stomach illness was eating its way through the group. It would seemingly bounce from person to person, so somebody would be sick every day for 2 days. We were travelling from our 4th hotel when it was my turn to be sick. The group dropped me off and got me settled in my room before they continued for their day of activities. The hotel we pulled up to was straight out of that Keenan and Kel Halloween special. Suits of armour in the foyer, poorly lit, and a very creepy old owner, who looked like he died years ago, but had stuck around. We were the only people staying at the hotel, so it was eerie quiet. There was also a cat that lived in the hotel and was howling for what felt like hours. The stairs to our room were magnificently large and ornate, and the hallways were pitch black. They were motion activated, but on a large delay. So you'd walk into the hallway, and they'd flicker after you've already walked past them. I got to my room, and all I could think about was the sloshing in my stomach. My stomach contents were basically liquefied, and I had fluid shooting out of both ends. I literally crawled into my bed and fell asleep for hours. I was awoken halfway through my sleep to the sound of my doorknob jiggling for about 3 minutes, before the door very slowly opened, and I can see out into the hallway. It's pitch black, and the lights weren't activated. I managed to meekly say, "Hello?" and there was no response. I was in no condition to get up, so I just waited another 20 seconds, and the door just slammed shut with a loud bang. I very badly had to go to the bathroom again, but I was too afraid to crawl my way back to it. As I finally mustered the courage to relieve myself, I heard the water in the sink begin to run, as if somebody was washing their hands. That's when I realized the door was open to the bathroom. I closed it because it smelled of vom shits, and I could feel the hairs on my arms stand, and I wasn't sure what to do. I just threw the covers over my head and tried to get back to sleep. I woke again after a couple of hours, and my group returned to the hotel maybe an hour before I woke. I walked down to dinner, and everybody was sitting around this dusty large table staring at me like I was a ghost. They asked me if I was the one opening their closets and their doors, or if I was the one knocking on their doors and running away before they opened them. One girl said she heard a voice whispering through her window, but we were up maybe 3 or 4 floors. During the night, I was knocked out cold and didn't experience anything else, but everybody in my group had to deal with constant door harassment, and more of them heard whispers. The cat also began to howl violently at 11 p.m. and didn't stop until 1 a.m. I was in a 100% travel job and was being dispatched to Whidbey Island in Washington State. The main hotel line that I usually stayed with was fully booked, so I ended up staying in some sort of themed hotel. I think it had a windmill as a decoration, and one in its front parking lot. Anyway, I checked into the hotel, and the room I'm issued, I noticed right off the bat that the walls are just blood red colour. I actually liked that colour, but found it odd, as all the walls in the room would be painted such a dark colour, since most hotels are very lightly painted. This was years and years ago, when not all hotels had DVD players, and since I was travelling so much, I would bring my PS2 as my own dedicated DVD player. So I hook it up and began my sleep routine, which was more or less throw in a movie, set up the sleep timer and pass out. So during the night, I wake up and look around, and see the little lights from my PS2 are still on. But something seemed odd. I start to feel a tingle moving through my body, and I started to hear slight whispers of a giggling woman. I couldn't move, but I remember not feeling in danger. But then I felt a very distinct vibration on my left thigh. It was my phone. The only problem was that when I go to sleep, I always left my phone on the far side of the room, as an alarm clock, so I would have to wake up and turn it off. This realization instantly snapped me out of whatever was going on. Suddenly I could move again, but the really odd thing, nothing in the room really changed. I didn't wake up. There was no flash of anything to separate what was going on with what was real. My PS2 lights were still faintly glowing. The vibration stopped, as my phone was indeed on the other side of the room, and I had no clue what happened. Funny thing is, the next day I noticed that in my room there were 7 mirrors, and above the bed was a picture. Now generally I don't take notice of in-hotel pictures since, well, they tend to be all the same. But this one was of a smiling woman. Honestly, I've done some research into it, and it seems highly likely it was just an episode of sleep paralysis. It's never happened to me before or since, but it was extremely freaky when it did. 14 years ago, I was visiting Taipei with my family. Our room was on the 5th floor of the hotel, and it was really the 4th floor, but labelled 5 because 4 is unlucky. In the dead of night, I woke up to the sound of knocking, but it wasn't coming from our door. It was coming from the direction of the windows. There were no balconies for a person to stand on, just normal windows, which meant that someone knocking on that 5th floor window was impossible. And yet, the window knocking persisted. Mind racing, I wondered what inhuman, unnatural entity was there, just on the other side of the window. I was too terrified to move. It took all my strength to whisper up to my parents, who were on the next bed over, "Do you hear that?" They woke up, and I repeated my question, my voice hoarse with dread. I didn't dare look in their direction, as their bed was closer to the window, and the unholy knocking. My parents laughed. The knocking sound had been my mother farting in her sleep. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Hotels can certainly be creepy places for a variety of reasons, whether it be the spooks that remain there, or perhaps the other guests you're staying with. Certainly creepy. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to drop that like and leave a comment with your thoughts. It is very much appreciated and can go further than you think. And of course, it would be fantastic if you would just hit that subscribe button, as well as press the little bell icon, to be notified every time I upload. I did mention this yesterday, but my good friend Briefcase has uploaded another video. It is really, really good, and it would mean the world to me if you guys would check it out and show him some support. He's a really fantastic up-and-coming creator, and a really good in real life friend of mine. So why not go ahead and watch it straight after this video is done. You'll be able to find a link in the description and on screen very soon. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.